Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Shmuel, the first book of Samuel, with chapter 17, Perek Tes. Perek Yud Zayin. If you recall, at the end of chapter 16, David had been introduced to Saul, as a musician, harp player, and he played for Saul when Saul was depressed, when he was melancholy, when he was sad, and we were given the impression and the idea that the reason why Saul was sad was because the Spirit of God had left him. That spirit of confidence, that spirit of optimism that Saul had when he knew that God was behind him, so to speak, that God was supporting him, so to speak, because Shmuel, the prophet, had told him so, was gone, was lifted from him after the disaster that had occurred to Saul's kingdom during the battle against Amalek. And David was playing for him. This chapter 17, one of the big problems that a lot of the commentaries deal with here is the sequence of events. There's a lot of things that don't seem to jive well. If Saul knew who David was, why certain things happened in this chapter the way they happened. I am going to tell you right now that I'm going to take the approach that as much as I can to stick with the chronology as it happens, as it's laid out in the book. Even though I fully acknowledge and understand that there are certain questions that will remain glaring as to what happened when, but I think it's important for us to simply read it as if this happened in succession, even though it may not have. So that's how I'm going to read it. So imagine that Saul knows David as someone who plays music for him. He was introduced to him. He was told he's a good-looking man. He's ruddy, which is like a healthy-looking man, reddish in color, and a strong man, and a one who plays music and plays beautiful music for Saul. Now, this chapter 17 is one of the most famous chapters in the entire Tanakh. It was, of course, the story of David and Goliath, and I am going to explain it and understand it in a way that I believe brings out the full, true lessons of this chapter, and it will be based a lot on how we've studied until now. Vayasfu Socho asher liYehuda, and they gathered in a place called Socho, which is in the portion of the land belonging to Judah, the tribe of Judah. Vayachanu, and they camped bein Socho uvein Azekah be'efes damim, and they encamped in that region of Socho, between Socho and Azekah, which is well-known place today. There's a Tel Azekah, which has been well excavated. The Efes Damim, in the place called Efes Damim. Efes Damim literally translates to there is no blood. It would seem that this name is the name that was given to that place after this battle, because it was a battle that never actually happened, and no blood, other than the blood we'll find out later of Goliath himself, other than that, no blood was spilled, no actual fighting took place. So it's an appropriate name for this place to commemorate the battle that didn't actually happen. Now, V'Shaol v'ish Yisrael, and Saul, and the men of Israel, meaning the strong warriors of Israel, Ne'esu, gathered together, Vayachanu, and they camped Be'emek ha'ela, in the valley of Elah. Now this is important. They are camped at the low ground. And they set up a line of battle to counter the line of battle that had been set up by the Philistines, presumably on higher ground above them. So the Philistines already have the advantage of being on the higher ground. For whatever reason, this is how this battle was laid out. And the Philistines were standing on the top of this mountain on one side, V'Yisrael and the Israelites, Omdim al armies, that were standing on another mountain, even though the encampment was in the valley, in the deeper part. There were mountains opposite the Philistine mountains where the Israelite soldiers could go up and face the Philistines, V'Hagai Veinehem, and there was a valley between them. So here we have this all set up. You have the scene drawn out. Now, I want to point out a few things that are important, and I've been emphasizing this throughout our study of Shmuel and throughout our study of Saul, and what his flaws were. We saw Shaul had some very good characteristics, but the one flaw that I've been emphasizing as we go through, that Shaul refused to learn, is the lesson, the true lesson of what it means to serve God, how serving God is different from serving other idols and other supposed gods. And that was the idea, and this is the idea that Shmuel was trying to teach Shaul. And we read this in the previous chapters. I explained it clearly, and I showed it to you in the verses. Shaul understood God as a powerful spiritual force that ruled over Israel, and that if ritualistically he is served appropriately, he would then serve to defend the people of Israel against its enemies. Shaul looked towards sacrifices, so he was faithful to God, so to speak, but not faithful to the God, the unique, special God that makes the God of Israel different from all other gods. What makes the God of Israel different from all other gods? Not just the obvious fact that one is true and the other is not, but it's much more than that. It's the whole idea, the idea that what God wants, God with a capital G wants, is for his people to follow in his footsteps, to keep his commands, to worship him by doing, by action in this world, not by sacrificing or giving things supposedly to God, because God doesn't need anything. Now, this and the way to get help from this God is by acting, by doing, and we saw this in the battle with the Philistines, where Saul's son Jonathan went and he saw that the odds were against the people. And how does one use that to his advantage? So Jonathan went and he made a sneak attack, caused havoc in the camp of the Philistines, so that the people of Israel were able to attack and rout the Philistines in battle. Jonathan used his brains, he used his bravery and his courage, and despite all odds, he managed to use his strength against the Philistines and exploit their weaknesses. And we're going to see the same thing happening here. This is the God of Israel. The God of Israel tells us to act, to do, not to pray, not to sacrifice, not to do rituals, and not to pretend that somehow we can arouse this more mighty God against the others. Now, and Shaul, despite being taught this numerous times by Shmuel, by Samuel, he didn't get the lesson. He was too arrogant to get and learn and understand the lesson. And this is what we're going to see play out before us now as we read this chapter. So we have the battle laid out. Vayetze ish habeinayim. And there was this is generally translated, a man of like a champion, the one who stood out from among everyone else. Mimachanot haPlishtim, from the camps of the Philistines. Goliath Shemo, his name was Goliath Migat, from the town of Gath. Gath was one of the 5 major principalities of the Philistine area. Gavho Sheish Amot Vazeret. He was 6 amot and a little more tall. An amma is translated as a cubit, which is generally about 1.5 feet. So if he was 6 amot, we're looking at 9 foot tall. Maybe so. Whether this is an exaggeration or whether this was his actual height is not that important. The bottom line is that he was an extremely large, imposing figure and scary-looking guy. V'kova nechoshet al rosho, he had a helmet made out of bronze over his head. V'shiryon kaskasim hu lavush, and he was dressed in a armor made of scales of metal. umishkal hashiryon, and he was so big and strong that the weight of the armor he was wearing was chameshet alafim shkalim nechoshet, was 5,000 copper shekels. So a very imposing figure covered in armor, seemingly an impregnable, powerful giant man. Umitzchat nechoshet al raglav, he had bronze leg armor over his feet. V'chidon nechoshes ben ksevav, and he had between his shoulders he had slung, or over his shoulders he had a bronze spear. The eitz chanito, and the wood of his spear, kiminor orgim, was literally, that means like a bar that belongs to a weaver, which is a large bar. V'lahevet chanito, and the head, the tip of the spear, the sheish meot shkalim barzel, was iron, 600 iron shekels worth of metal. And the one who carried his shield to protect him from presumably incoming arrows or spears would walk before him. So a very imposing sight. Vayamod vayikra al marchot Yisrael, and he got up and he called out to the battle lines of the people of Israel. Vayomer lem, and he said, Lama teitzu la'aroch milchama. Why bother coming out and having a war which is going to cause death and destruction to everyone? That's my own interjection here. Halo anochi haplishti, I am a Philistine. V'atem avodim li Shaul, and you are servants to Saul. Biru lachem ish v'yered olai. Choose a man and have him come fight me. Im yuchal hilachem iti, if he can fight and overcome me, v'hikani, and strike me down. V'hayinu lachem la'avodim, we will then be enslaved to you. This way we can do this without a battle. And if I strike him down, then then you will be enslaved to us and you will serve us. So now, this is what he says in his speech. Vayomer haplishti, and the Philistine said, presumably this Goliath, Ani cherafti et ma'archot Yisrael hayom hazeh. He said, he boasts to everyone, presumably more in this case at this point to the Philistines. I have cherafti can be translated in many ways. It usually means I have made fun of, or I have debased, I have defamed the battle lines of the people of Israel today. Tenuli ish, send me a man v'nilacham ayachad, and let's fight it out together. Now, why did he use the language cherafti? I have embarrassed, I have ashamed, I have defiled the battle lines of Israel. Keep in mind what I told you before, and that was that in the Philistines' mind, the Israelites had a God, and the Philistines had a God. Whoever's God is more powerful is the one who's going to have his people win over the enemy. By doing this, what he's saying here is like this. Why have your God battle with all of his people against my God battling with all of his people against each other? We can prove whose God is more powerful in a one-on-one battle. And then we'll realize who is the one that should be enslaved to the other. This is a way to understand, like, if this is a battle, why should one guy be able to call out a challenge like this and everyone be scared and everyone be afraid? Just fight a war. But the point is that what he's saying is much more than that. All you are just, as he said, you are just servants to Saul. You're not any better than me. You're not any better than us. You serve your king. We serve our king. You serve your God. We serve our God. So, I'm a big dude. Send over somebody and let's fight it out. And we'll see whose God is more powerful. Vayishma Shaul v'chol Yisrael, and Saul heard this, and all of the people of Israel, at divrei haplishti ha'eleh. They heard the words of this Philistine. It doesn't say they saw the Philistine and they were afraid of the Philistine. Because in a battle, what's one big guy going to mean? But they heard the words of the Philistine, and they did not know how to counter that kind of attack. They looked at this and said, he's right. Who can represent our God and fight him and win this big, powerful guy? And because they don't understand how God works, and they think that God works through magical ritual and through sacrifices and so on, they think, well, who can we send up against him? Because they realize that the challenge is going to be very difficult. Vayichatu vayiru ma'od, and they were very afraid. They could not rely on the way they believed in God. They did not know who would have the merit, who would have God behind him so that he could fight this terrifying figure. This is going to complete chapter 17, part A, Shmuel 1:17a. This is a very long chapter, so I'm going to break it down into several pieces. Right now, we have set up this challenge of Goliath, the Philistine, and why Saul and the people of Israel were now afraid of him, because they did not have the kind of understanding of God that they needed to understand how to counter such a threat. So here they are, scared. Thank you for studying this together with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of this chapter and, of course, the rest of the book of Samuel together.